everybody. So for this video, it's not going to be a particular scale outline video, but I want to take just a brief moment to talk about chords versus scales in two particular facets. So when I talk about chords, I'm talking about like for example a C major 6 chord, or an F major 6 chord, or a D minor 6 chord. Those would be examples of chords. Another example of a chord would be a diminished chord, such as a fully diminished 7th chord. Now, as opposed to chords, let's also talk about scales. So in terms of scales in particular, we can talk about this in two different ways. So a scale we can refer to as either just adjacent notes, in terms of, for instance, a major scale. So C major scale would be C major scale. But we can also talk about scales in terms of a scale of chords. Meaning, for instance, if I take the major 6 diminished scale for C6, C major 6 rather, so that scale of chords would be inversions of C major 6 and D fully diminished. We just alternate back and forth. C major 6, F fully diminished, C major 6, diminished, 6, diminished, 6. So there are two categories. We have just quote-unquote normal scales, like a major scale or a dominant 7th scale. But we also, in terms of chords, have chords like this, but that's also a scale of chords. Okay, so now, given the title of this video, within the context of a 2 to 5 to 1 progression, which we know is very prevalent within the jazz world, right? So let's say we have a basic 2 to 5 to major 1 progression in the key of C major. So that would be as follows: D minor 7 for the minor 2 chord, G dominant 7 for the dominant 7th chord, and then we could say either C major 7 for the major 1 chord, but that's really just C major 6. So let's think about this in two major ways. So the main question is this: what scale do we use over that basic 2 to 5 to 1 progression? Well, in terms of which scale of chords, a la Barry Harris, we use for each of those 3 chord qualities, we would do as follows. Now, for all of you very well versed Barry Harris scholars, you'll know that these aren't the only particular ones that we can use, but from the most basic perspective, for the D minor 7th chord, in terms of the scale of chords that we can use, we'll just use F major 6 diminished scale, because D minor 7 is just an inversion using the exact same 4 notes as F major 6. Meaning, while the D minor 7th chord is going on harmonically, we can use inversions of the F major 6 diminished scale. So in other words, to be clear, while that chord is going on over the D minor 7th chord, we can use inversions of F major 6 and G fully diminished 7 to create movement within just that one chord. Now, when the harmony moves to the dominant 7, dominant 7, all of us Barry people know that we use the minor 6th chord built on the 5th scale degree, meaning in terms of G dominant 7, the 5th scale degree would be the note D natural, and we play the minor 6th chord built from that 5th scale degree, and we have D minor 6. So over the dominant 7th chord, G dominant 7, we can use the D minor 6 diminished scale, that scale of chords over G dominant 7. Okay? And then over the 1 chord, C major 6, major 7 or major 6, we would use, in terms of a scale of chords, we would use the C major 6 diminished scale. So what does this mean? Well, if we have 1, 2, 3 different chord qualities within the context of a 2 to 5 to 1 progression, that means we can use each of those 1, 2, 3 scales of chords to create movement, even when there's just one underlying chord going by. So for instance, here's what it would look and sound like if I were to just play inversions of each of those respective 6 diminished scales over the entire 2-5-1. So I'll play the root of the 2, the 5, and the 1 with my left hand to represent that harmonically going by in time, while my right hand will play inversions of the respective 6th chord in order to represent this concept. So let's imagine that this is just a 2-5-1 progression. I could do something that looks and sounds like this. You see what I did there? So the 2-5-1 is going by, but I'm using inversions of the 6th and diminished chords that directly correspond to each chord quality in order to create movement. Here, I'll do another one. So as you can see, one element of this is being able to have this work in time. So rhythmically, it has to align with the timing of when the harmony changes. So in terms of a 2-5-1, in terms of thinking in terms of chords that we can use to create movement, even when we just have one underlying chord, knowing the respective 6th diminished scale for each particular chord quality is important to be able to do that. Now, in terms of using just a normal scale, so not a scale of chords, but just a singular note scale in order to cover that entire progression, that 2 to 5 to 1 progression, here's what that would entail. So for the minor 2 chord, directly into the dominant 7th chord, those are 2 separate chords. Minor 2 to dominant 5, those 2 chords are going to be represented by 1 scale. And that 1 scale is going to be the dominant 7th scale. So in terms of our 2 to 5 to 1 progression in C major, we're going to use the G dominant 7th scale, not just to cover the D minor 7th chord, but also the G dominant 7th chord. So in time, here's what that would look and sound like. You see that? It went from 2 to 5, 2 different chords, but I only had to use one scale to cover both of those. So just to be clear, this is not a scale of chords, it's a singular scale that's covering both of those chords, not in a scale of chord sense, but in a singular linear scale type of fashion. 2 to 5 is really just the dominant 7th scale. 2 chords, 1 scale we use. So then from there, for the 1 chord, what do? We just do the major scale for the major 1 chord. So in terms of scales, a singular scale, so not a scale of chords, a singular scale, a 2 to 5 to 1 progression in the key of C major would look and sound like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. There you have it. So that's just a little clarification video on, within the context of a 2 to 5 to 1, we have to think in 2 separate ways. The first is in terms of using the 6th diminished scale, if we so choose, for each particular quality of chord, of a single chord, to give us the option, if we so choose, to create movement over a singular chord. Using a scale of chords over each particular chord to create movement over a singular chord. The second thing to keep in mind is, within the context of a 2-5-1, to be able to associate which particular single scale to be able to think and operate within outside of a scale of chords. So again, as one last reminder, a 2 to 5 to 1 progression is really just 5 to 1. That's the dominant 7th scale. And the major scale. One more time, a little faster. Okay, I hope that helps all of you. I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.